we will get things kicked off then. So, hello everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of LoftTalk from Digital Loft. My name's Beth. I'm head of business development at the agency, and today I'm joined with Millie, who's one of our fabulous digital PR managers. Some of you might have seen her before, but today she's got a really insightful session for us that is going to be really useful over the coming months because bizarrely, we're in October and Christmas is just around the corner. So we are going into the festive season. So Millie's going to be talking to us all today, all about how to maximize your digital PR success this festive season. If anyone has any questions, please do pop them in the chat and we can go through them with Millie at the end. But I will hand over to Millie now.
Thank you so much, Beth. So hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining this session. So as Beth mentioned, I'm going to be walking you through a couple of ways that we can really maximise success of our digital PR strategies in line with the last couple of months of this year. Now that we are finally reaching the end of October and Christmas doesn't feel too much like a swear word anymore, and we can start to touch on these topics. So from the beginning of October time, we really start to see Christmas content begin to churn out, and those requests from journalists start to ramp up around Christmas content as well. But once Halloween's out of the way, and we head into those months of November and December, as we know, the news cycle does shift and become very, very heavily saturated with festive content. And ultimately, we're all just trying to find a way to make this season work for our clients to cut through some of the noise surrounding this time of year. So hopefully you'll find this talk helpful and it'll provide you with some actionable insights to take away and implement. But if you do have any questions while I'm running through these slides, as Beth mentioned, please do just pop them in the chat box and we'll run through them at the end of the session. Okay, so we'll get started. So looking at what we'll cover within this session. So firstly, we'll look at planning and timing since we're so close to that real peak of the season, and I'll share any tips or tricks that can be utilised to ensure you're planning ahead in the best and most effective ways. And then we'll walk through evergreen content and how to maximise the potential of some campaigns you might have launched throughout the year. I'm also going to cover seasonal and once a year opportunities, which kind of says what it does on the tin, but we'll cover a couple of ways to utilise this as well. And then finally, just asking ourselves if it's relevant. So the reason we'll touch on this is, as I said earlier, the news cycle does become very heavily saturated. So we are all kind of competing to ensure that we're landing brands within those publications that are touching on Christmas content, but does it actually work or make sense for your brands to be doing this? So firstly, I'm going to run through the 3 phases of your seasonal strategy. So as we know, October and definitely September are certainly planning months. So this is where you want to be getting all of your insight from clients on discounts and deals and any upcoming offers they might be promoting over the next couple of months. Hopefully you're almost done in production with your Christmas campaigns, or you've already got them prepped and ready to launch. And if you haven't, then I would absolutely be getting your teams on this as soon as possible. But you should also be using the month of October to really build interest in your client or what they're about to offer to the press too. Obviously, depending on your client, you may have the opportunity to kind of reach out to those relevant journalists and let them know you have some exciting data on XYZ centered around the festive season coming their way very soon. And we do also know that journalists tend to bank content for later use as well. So this just puts you on their radar for when that campaign does land in their inbox. Then you have the peak of your strategy, which arrives in November. So you should absolutely be launching your Christmas campaigns at the very start of November at the absolute latest, but ideally before this. This also allows you to tie your strategies in with Black Friday and Cyber Monday if you launch in the later weeks of October or November. So it just really allows you to streamline those strategies and ensure that everything's as organised as it can be as well. You should also be focusing a lot of your time and effort on monitoring your Christmas focus strategies during the first couple of weeks of November. We know that what we're pitching to press is very time sensitive. And as I say, we're kind of competing to land that coverage. So we need to just ensure that we're keeping an eye on how these strategies are performing. And if the open rates are looking like the contents of interest, or if we've had any replies from any journalists as well, taking all of those insights into account when we're revisiting or looking at refreshing headlines for a campaign angle that maybe just hasn't landed yet. And then finally, we head into December, which I would definitely class as the last push. So December is a shorter month. Obviously, lots of agencies go into office shutdown for at least a week over December. So we can all go and celebrate and drink lots of mulled wine, or at least that is what I'll be doing it when I'm off for Christmas this year. But also the news cycle will have been covering Christmas content for well over a month by December. So you really need to have something fresh to offer. Lots of journalists do also start to break up for Christmas early in December, so you really need to have a plan in place for that last month to ensure you're maximising the opportunity to pitch to your key journalists during that time. There are, of course, some journalists that do work across the Christmas break, so just make sure that you're seeking those out in advance as well and pulling them into a dedicated list to schedule content to them across the Christmas break as well where it's relevant to. Okay, so I have to remember to click this button, so bear with. So looking at evergreen content. So I feel like most people will be familiar with what this is, but if you're not, it's essentially content that can be repurposed time and time again because there's no sort of real definitive subject or specific topic that it touches on that's really niche or limited to a time of year or to an event, for example. The one thing I would say about evergreen campaigns, they do tend to be data-led. So as I mentioned, a data-led campaign is more easily tied back to an event or season, as opposed to a campaign that's centered around an event, meaning your outreach options are a little bit more bespoke to that time of launch for that campaign. The great thing about evergreen content is that it can be repurposed time and time again. So it might need a small data change or it might need a tiny update to the content or positioning, but generally the objective or the storytelling within the campaign does remain the same, allowing for that content to be easily refreshed with timely news hooks or seasonal events, as we'll touch on in a second. So hopefully everyone will have something in mind that they're already kind of pre-planning to refresh for the Christmas period. So the bits I'm going to run through in the next slide should really help to kind of give you a direction in terms of how you can take that content a step further to really maximise the opportunity for success across a pre-existing campaign. Oh, there we go. So when it comes to having a look at the campaigns you've launched throughout this year, I'd first start off by making a list of all the campaigns that have some sort of topical hook that is relatable to different times of the year. So an example I've got in here is a campaign we launched for a motoring brand that looked at the UK cities that have the best access to parking spaces. So before we entered the Christmas season last year, we'd already bookmarked the campaign for use around that peak of Black Friday and in the run up to manic Christmas shopping weekends and also panic buying ahead of Christmas Day. But we didn't just reuse the data, we refreshed the top 10 ranking cities before going into outreach and also coupled that refreshed data with search insights. So for example, if Manchester had the worst parking availability, we coupled that statement with search insight that suggested that although it has the worst parking availability overall in the UK, within the last week it had actually received around 10,000 search queries for parking in that city, which showed that there was a now relevancy and also gave us that hook that shoppers should be aware that they're likely to be faced with limited parking options or hold-ups if they're heading to that city centre to do their Christmas shopping. Repurposing an evergreen campaign is also a really quick and easy way to make your client's content relevant and topical for this time of year. As I just mentioned, it didn't take us very long to refresh that top 10 list. And it also didn't take us very long to look for search volumes to really bring the topicality of that content to this time of year. Of course, it is very much dependent on whether it makes sense for the campaign you're looking at repitching to be hooked back into the festivities. So always just ensure that you're considering this and not just firing something out with a loose hook and hoping that it sticks. In line with that as well, there's very minimal preparation and planning needed to push these pieces out. So if you're looking to refresh the top 10 within some rankings, it's not going to take very long to do that. However, if you're looking to refresh a wider data set, you might just need to factor in the amount of time it'll take to do that and whether it makes sense to give that amount of time to a refresh of the data and sort of ask yourself if you might just end up losing the hook within that time. You'll also need to consider when the original data was collected and if that could have changed quite drastically within that time period or whether it might be up to date enough to pitch it without needing to change anything. So if the campaign was based on search data, for example, and that was collected in February of this year, you're more than likely going to need to update that search data for the month that you're going to relaunch this campaign in, just to ensure that everything is factual and correct to be issuing to a journalist now. You might also have a campaign that hasn't performed at all throughout the year, and it may have just been shelved for use at a later date, or where it's more relevant to pull it back out. We've definitely all been there. It's a really good example, of this is the Fragrance Stars campaign that I've also popped in this slide. So we'd launched this for a client in December a couple of years back, and we were quite successful in hooking this into the news at the time, but it didn't perform as widely or as well as we had initially hoped that it would. I think we went live a little bit too late with this one, to be honest, to make it land as well as we'd expected. So instead, the following year, in preparation for the festive season, we bookmarked the campaign and pulled it back out for Black Friday and Christmas. We refreshed a couple of the data sets and launched a series of new angles for this campaign then at that time. So we targeted stocking filler roundups. We also looked at the best Christmas gifts for him and for her, the most popular fragrances of the year overall, which we refreshed just to ensure that all that data was as up to date as it could be. We also targeted gift guides, general roundup articles and beauty press, and this piece did really well despite performing at an average level the year previous, and that's because we knew there would be an audience for this towards the end of the next year if we got the preparation and timings right for the season. And then finally, as I mentioned in this slide, you've already done the work. So why not use the opportunity to reutilize those strong hooks and angles? So my last example on this slide is the Food Lovers Index that we did for a travel brand. So this campaign had already started to perform really well when we launched, but we went back into the data for this campaign and had a fresh look at the best ranking cities for foodies around the world, and then tied this back to the best cities to visit around Christmas time. So we did a little bit of additional research and looked into the most popular cities people were visiting for a Christmas city break, and then coupled that data with the findings from the campaign and alongside the interest in the hook, alongside the interest, to rank the top Christmas cities for food lovers. So again, there were lots of hooks we could explore. We know people love a Christmas market, so this was a really key tie-in for us when revamping this campaign and pushing it back out for the festive season. And then we come on to seasonal and once a year opportunities. So as I kind of said earlier, it says what it does on the tin, but I know that this is going to be one of the most key elements to your seasonal planning for the upcoming months. So when it comes to these opportunities, it's really important to pre-plan where you can and make the most of those opportunities, as I mentioned. And most of that does come from being aware of the opportunities that are upcoming. So we know that some of these really key dates that present themselves around this time of year don't really tend to differ, but I think it really is all about being aware of how to utilise them in the best and most proactive way that's kind of really key when it comes to planning and content around these seasonal pieces. So the first one to touch on is definitely Black Friday. Despite what people may think, Black Friday is definitely not dead. It's one of the most key dates in a PR's calendar. I think it's really important to also touch on how Black Friday and Cyber Monday are no longer a one-day event. And so this means you're not just planning for one specific date, you're more than often planning for a week, if not 2 weeks at a time. Earlier this week, our lovely head of PR, Chloe, shared a clip on our agency's LinkedIn, which touched on some of the tips that you can utilise to really amplify your digital PR success across Black Friday in particular. So here are just a couple of key takeaways and actions that you can go away and implement that we utilise every year at the Loft. So the first one is to just really make sure that you've got your team together. Black Friday is an incredibly busy time for journalists and PRs, so just make sure you've got that dedicated team to work across Black Friday content. You're really going to need to have one eye on the press at all times in the lead up and during that week or 2 weeks or even up to a month in some cases actually of those Black Friday deals. So having a team that's dedicated to doing this is going to be really beneficial to that longer term strategy across Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Secondly, just really ensure that you finalise your deals by the end of October, which is not very far away now. So if you do take anything from this talk, please go and get your Black Friday deals prepared after this session. You really need to have an extensive list from your clients of the deals that they may be planning to set live for Black Friday or ahead of that date as well. Having that fully formed list from your client in terms of the go live date and the end date, and then also any further discounts they may decide to make for their products between the start and end date, will just really allow for you to plan and put a well-informed strategy in place ahead of that go live date as well. Also, make sure that you create a master media list. So this means going back through previous coverage from the last year and pulling together a dedicated list of specific Black Friday journalists you want to get back in touch with ahead of time and reintroduce your brands alongside any deals they had last year and the deals they're set to have live this year and why it should kind of really be something that journalist wants to get excited about. It also then gives the journalist an opportunity to let you know if they're not covering Black Friday content this year and actually who we should be redirecting our efforts to. And then finally, just make sure your pitches are really easy to digest. So ensuring you include all information on the product or the offer, the percentage of the value of the product that's going to be discounted, and also include what that's equivalent to in a monetary figure. So if it's 10% off, is that going to be equal to £50 or £100? That can really help solidify the interest in the product and why that journalist then may look to cover it within their article. And then also when you're including images in your outreach, if you're attaching them within a Dropbox folder, for example, just make sure you're going that extra step and labeling all of those images so it's really easy for the journalist to nip into the file and pull out the images they want to use. As I mentioned, it's a really busy time for them as it is for us, so we just want to make sure that their job is as easy as possible. And then lastly, just to touch on Black Friday, just definitely don't let these opportunities pass you by. At Digital Loft each year, we see tons of results from Black Friday. Last year, we had a client rank in position 1 for the term Black Friday Christmas trees after utilising a series of on-site offers to land them in product roundups. And these sorts of results all kind of really stem from getting on top of pre-planning and having those conversations with clients as early as possible to really ensure that success. So then moving on to roundups, firstly, they're so versatile and they're not always limited to a physical product either. So you might have a hotel brand, for example, that's looking to offer a festive discount on a one-night spa break stay as part of their seasonal promotions. There will absolutely be some journalists that are interested in covering this sort of offer in terms of maybe the best gifts that are things to do this Christmas, or maybe even an article that looks at what to get someone who has everything. But then you do, of course, have journalists who are looking to cover physical products such as perfumes or candles, for example, as well. So where you have a client that really offers those sorts of products that we know are very popular gifts around Christmas time, it's really worth spending the time to become familiar with the types of publications that cover these sorts of products within roundups and start prepping those ahead of time in terms of how you're going to pitch those products to those journalists. Some might like to receive samples ahead of writing an article on the product, so just ensure that you're aware of all of this and plan for that time to arrange delivery, and then also for them to sample the products as well. Also, make sure you're keeping an eye out for response source opportunities or journalist requests. We see lots of journalists actually looking for products to feature within their roundups or best buy guides around Christmas time. So these are also great opportunities for you to get those products featured within those pieces. And then, of course, we have Boxing Day sales to consider. So when you're chatting to your client about Black Friday offers, it's also a really good time to kind of check in to find out if they're planning to do any Boxing Day sales or offers too. They might not have finalised these yet, but just knowing that they're going to be coming up very soon is really important. You'll then be able to take a similar approach to planning for Black Friday with this strategy in really creating a dedicated list of those journalists that cover Boxing Day offers and what sorts of products or offers they actually cover. Again, lots of brands tend to utilise this opportunity to get the last bit of Christmas spending out of customers, who are probably all full to the brim with Christmas dinner and mulled wine. So if your clients are planning to have some offers around this time, definitely ensure that you're prepared for them. We are also, of course, out of office across Boxing Day, so just being even more prepared for these sales than you would be for Black Friday is really important. Ensuring you know which journalists to target ahead of time by checking in on who's going to be working over that period and putting it on their radar that you're going to be sending over something within that time frame that will be of interest to them. And then also scheduling that outreach and ensuring that you've got everything scheduled properly before you head off for Christmas as well. So including everything that journalists might need to know within your pitch, such as images, product or offer descriptions, and then also full information on the discounts and when they're valid until as well. It's a similar story when it comes to scheduling New Year's Eve and New Year's Day content. So this one does become a little bit less relevant for every piece of content you might have going out for a client around that time. But maybe within one of your campaigns you've launched within the seasonal window, there's a specific New Year's Eve or New Year's Day hook that you might want to utilise. So you really need to identify the journalists that are going to be working across that time frame again. So you'll know that you're sending this out to the most relevant people that are actually likely to open your pitch around the time it's sent out. And it's not just going to sit at the bottom of that journalist inbox and probably get deleted when they come back in January as it's no longer relevant to them. And then comes the wind down of the season. So we've come back to work in January. All the offers we've previously been pitching have now ended and our Christmas hooks are no longer relevant for our journalists to be covering anymore. But is there a way you can really utilise the wind down of the season to amplify the content for your clients? Maybe there's a hook to the post-festive clean, thinking about those families who've had lots of people over or had family and friends stay over the festive season, or what can you do with all of that festive chocolate and leftover mulled wine? If you've got the opportunity to jump on these themes in the first week back in January, then definitely be doing this. This is a little bit more of a niche example, but when we came back in January last year, we found a way to make our Christmas tree client remain relevant despite being in January. So we used the opportunity to push a little bit of product PR around their storage bags for Christmas trees in the first week back after Christmas. And we landed some really nice coverage for them off of the back of this. And it really just showed to our client how we are kind of thinking on our feet and pushing their content and products that step further to really maximize the success for that time of year for them. And then just kind of to round off this section is, I call it the last plan for Jan, and looking at whether you're able to tie back into Blue Monday. So not all brands do this, but some brands do utilise Blue Monday to offer some additional discounts or promotional codes so people can kind of treat themselves around what is classed as the worst time of the year. So we're post-Christmas, we're in the midst of winter and back at work. So some brands do really tap into this date to offer their customers and wider consumers a little pick-me-up. So it's always a good idea to just check in with your client to see if they're planning on doing anything around this time of the month in January. And again, just using the beginning of the month to pre-plan for this in the same way that you would across Black Friday and Boxing Day sales. Okay, so my last slide is going to touch on whether it's relevant. So the reason I'm touching on this in a deck that talks about how to maximize success over Christmas is because relevancy is obviously the buzzword of the year in digital PR. There is literally no point in doing our jobs unless it makes sense for a brand to be seen talking about certain topics or giving their advice on certain themes. And this still stays true when it comes to Christmas content. So when considering if it makes sense for your client to be jumping on the theme of Christmas or seasonal content in general, the first question to ask yourself is, does it actually make sense to do this for your client and for their brand? You really need to consider your client's target audience first if the answer is that you're not actually sure. Consider where their audience might be looking for Christmas content in your client's niche. If you're able to think of some content that they may be looking for in that area, is it actually possible to then create content that you think will be picked up by your client's most relevant publications, or has it been covered before? If the answer is no, then you should really be steering clear of trying to make your clients relevant within festive themes. You might have a sheet roofing client, for example, and maybe they specialize in building pergolas or pergolas. I never actually know how to pronounce this word. There's no real way that springs to mind of tying this brand into a relevant festive story or into festive content that will actually get picked up by their most relevant publications. So the chances are really that the real relevant hook doesn't exist between sheet roofing and Christmas. So in short, relevancy does really remain key. While it may be really tempting to sort of find a way to segue your client into festive coverage, just don't lose sight of that relevancy hook during the season and actually save your energy for an awareness date or a season that you actually can tie your client back to and do it really well. So, for example, with a sheet roofing client, as we all know, you would probably save your seasonal specific content for those summer months and maybe see at this time of the year if you can get your client to squeeze a discount in ahead of those warmer months for those preparing their gardens for summer. But I would definitely recommend clear and steer of any Christmas content, no matter how creative you may get with trying to make it relevant. And I also think the main key takeaway here is that if you have to try to make a season relevant for your client, then it's probably just not relevant for their brand at all. Remember that not every single publication out there will be covering Christmas content, so you also don't need to try and make it relevant. And then just lastly for me, it is, in my opinion anyway, the best time of the year to be a PR. So definitely enjoy the madness of the season. Have fun with the content you can create or reutilize for your clients and brands, and also ensure you get stuck in with the opportunities that Black Friday can present for such a diverse range of brands as well. And if you can do all of these things, then you can absolutely maximize success for your clients this festive season. And that's everything from me. Thank you so much to everyone for joining and listening to me talk. I'm more than happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Millie. We have got a couple of questions in. The first one is, how do I know which journalists are writing Christmas and Black Friday gift guides? So how do you identify that opportunity for those journalists that might be relevant for your client at that time?
Yeah, so it definitely comes down to doing a bit of research. You will really need to spend a little bit of time, block some time out in your calendar if you're kind of really going to be putting a focused amount of effort into landing those pieces. Do your research into what the journalist covers normally, and then also just kind of search for your keywords, have a look for those roundup articles and see what products they usually cover. You will find some journalists do a kind of wide range of products, some focus on maybe just beauty products, for example. So it does all really come down to research, to kind of ciphering out those journalists and kind of pulling out those key ones that you do really want to target.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Millie. And then kind of in the same vein, if you've got a client that maybe hasn't confirmed their Black Friday deals yet and it's getting a little bit close to the time and you know that that's what the journalists are looking for, what should you do then? So how should you be approaching your clients or liaising between journalists?
So I think in terms of with your clients, I think having those conversations as early as possible is always ideal, but we know sometimes there can be little bits of delays that get in the way of things kind of going live. So I think it kind of is just having that conversation with a journalist. If that client did some offers last year and you think they might be similar, or that the products are going to be kind of sat within a similar category, get in touch with any journalist that you saw cover that category of products last year and let them know that you've got some coming from this client. Kind of let them know beforehand so they can kind of pre-plan that into their agenda. So they might have an article that's set to go live next week, and you might then also be on their mind to get back in touch with if they maybe need a 10th product to list in that roundup. So always making those connections with journalists despite having the list or not, as long as you know you're going to get it at that point. I think it's really important to put it on the journalist radar, as well as be chasing your client for those to go live as soon as possible as well.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. We've had a question from someone who is saying, what about if you don't sell products? So what non-product PR ideas might be relevant for this season?
Yeah, so I think it kind of varies on your client. Like I say, I think I touched on an example with a hotel brand, for example. So, if they are set to have a seasonal offer on a night stay, so it's not a physical product, it's actually a promotional offer, you can really target journalists that cover those specific offers. So you'll have a couple of journalists that write for industry specific publications, as well as those lifestyle press, as well as national titles as well. And I think it's all about how you angle it. So you might be able to position that, as I mentioned in the example, I think it was kind of touched on those things to get someone who has kind of everything at Christmas, someone who has it all, and kind of positioning it that way and utilizing the opportunity to touch on those offers without physically having to kind of pitch a product to a journalist,
Yeah.
a sample, or including a roundup as well.
Yeah, Fab, thank you. Someone's asked, when would you say the cut-off point is for any Christmas-based stories?
I think this really depends on what your Christmas story is. I definitely think campaigns need to be going live now or early into November. I think I would never launch a campaign in December. Is probably what I would always launch it before. But if you've got some reactive pieces going out and you've got some really nice stats, there's no harm in pushing these out in December, but just be aware that you maybe won't get as vast a amount of coverage as you might do if you kind of get ahead of that peak of coverage as well.
And seems like it gets earlier and earlier every year, doesn't it?
100%. We were planning for Christmas in July this year.
Yeah. Someone has asked, Molly, sorry, has asked, how would you advise making festive content relevant for casino and gambling clients, please?
I think this is a trickier one, isn't it? There's a massive question mark against some sort of relevancy themes when it comes to casino brands. I think, again, it kind of really depends on what you would be looking at doing for those brands. I think there's an argument to be had for and against it, I think, when it comes to casino brands. So it's hard to give a definitive answer. I think it would always kind of really, really depend on the topic, to be honest. I think there probably would be ways to kind of segue a casino brand in, but I think it really depends on the story and how you would bring that back to the client. That is obviously the most important thing, without knowing too much about the brand specifically.
Yeah.
I think it is just kind of ensuring that your story actually makes sense to resonate with either the audience or with the brand in some way. I know there are looser relatabilities when it comes to casino brands, but just making sure that you're not pushing something out that really makes absolutely no sense for a casino brand to be seen talking about.
And I guess maybe looking at the content that works for them throughout the rest of the year and seeing if there's any way of bringing the festive hook into that.
Definitely. Yeah, reutilizing those angles, definitely. I think that's where you probably would look more at your evergreen pieces. Way to segue the festive themes in that way.
And speaking of evergreen pieces, someone has asked, when it comes to repurposing campaigns, do you actually send those to the journalists who maybe covered the story last year?
I think it would really depend, to be honest. If the journalist covers that sort of content, typically, then you might be able to reach back out to them and kind of see if it's something that would be of interest again. But I think it's really important to make sure that the content's different. So, although you would be using an evergreen story, so your story would remain sort of very similar, you just need to make sure that the hook or the angle you're pitching to them is different. You don't want to be seen sending the same stories out, especially if that journalist has already covered you. You kind of don't want to annoy them or damage that relationship, sending them the same content again. It would really need to have a completely different angle or position into that story, just to make sure, you're not sending them a complete blanket copy with just a different headline, for example. It would really need to have a different positioning within it.
But then I guess if it is like an index or something like that, then they might be really open to having the newest data, mightn't they? So it would depend on what the content is itself.
Yeah, definitely. If you've refreshed your data and you've kind of got different rankings as well, absolutely. I think it's nice to send it back out because those journalists cover those themes, but just make sure your story is positioned differently would be my advice.
Amazing. And then the final question is if the recording is going to be sent to everyone after the call. So yes, this recording is going to be up on our YouTube as well as on the Digital Loft /LoftTalk site as well. So we'll make sure that as soon as that's ready, which will probably be tomorrow, it is shared with everyone. I'm really sorry that my video's not on, by the way, everyone. It won't let me turn it back on. Zoom is not being very nice to me at the moment. But thank you so much, Millie. That was really, really insightful. I feel like everyone will have gotten so much from today's session, especially because we are heading into Black Friday period, Christmas, Boxing Day, January sales. So thank you so much. That was fab.
No,
we will be releasing details of the next Loft Talk at the end of this week. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much, guys.